Hey, what is up guys, and welcome to my new PC building guide. Oh yes, it really was time for a new PC because video rendering on my laptop crashed so often, and I thought, why not make a quick guide on how to build a PC. So let's get directly started and let's have a look at the components you need to build your first PC. Okay guys, then let's go quickly here through the components you need. And just to mention, it wasn't a new PC from the scratch. So actually I was just upgrading my old system, but I upgraded 90% of the parts, so I just used my old case, my old power supply and the hard drives. But the new CPU is an Intel i7-5820K. It's an hexa-core CPU and definitely right now the best thing you can get for the money. It's not the fastest one, so there are faster CPUs, but it has the best price-performance ratio right now. Also, when you buy a new CPU, you will need a new mainboard which supports the CPU and which got the correct socket. So for instance, the 5820K is running on the 2011-3 socket. And this mainboard here has the X99 chipset. That means it supports DDR4 RAM. And here you can see a 16GB DDR4 quad-channel kit. The only problem, it didn't come with heatsinks because the shop sent me the wrong one. But I'm not going to overclock, so heatsinks are not a must. But if you get the money, it's just $10 difference, buy the one with heatsinks. Now if you're focused on gaming, you should get a good GPU, and the GTX 970 currently has the best price-performance ratio. If you can get it, get the Mainboard G1 version because it has really good clocks and comes very close to the GTX 980. Now to cool the whole system, you will need several fans, so just make sure that the CPU is coming with a stock cooler. If you don't want to use it or if it doesn't come with a stock cooler, you also need a cooling system, like I'm using the Corsair H105 Watercooling system. Pretty cool thing because it has a dual radiator design, and yeah, you will see it later. Then you will also need to have at least one hard drive, but I would recommend to get one SSD and a hard drive. If you spend so much money on a system, it's definitely worth to get an SSD because it will really boost up your system. Also nice to have are disk drives, at least one to install Windows, but you can also use an USB drive to install Windows. So just buy one you like, Blu-ray or whatever. Okay, so to power up the whole system, we also need a power supply. Just make sure it has enough power to power all your components. There's an online calculator for that, and it's also good when the power supply you're using is 80+ certified. That means better efficiency and you save power costs. Okay, so that's it. What we're going to do now is prepare the case for all the parts you can see here, so let's get started. Okay guys, so here is my old case, the Cooler Master Cosmos S, a really big case, and that is also really important, so if you buy parts you have to make sure that they also fit your case. Now before we touch any of those components, we should ground ourselves. To ground yourself you just have to touch something which is made out of metal, some bigger part like the case, or just touch a radiator. Make sure you touch the blank metal to discharge yourself. That's really important because static charge can kill electronic components. And there are also some anti-static bands, so basically those are just wristbands which you connect to the case, so you're discharged for the whole time. But those are a little bit expensive and I'm not using that, so just before you touch anything, be sure to ground yourself. After you've grounded yourself, the first step is to install the power supply. So here this big fan basically pushes air through the power supply and cools it, and the hot air comes out here off the back side where you can also see the connector and the switch. And now we have to install that. If you have dust filters in your case, make sure that they are inserted. And you can also clean them so you can just wash them off, and usually you just have to slide them in and then you can install the power supply. This just makes sure that no dust is coming into the power supply and in the case. Now after you have placed the power supply correctly in the case, you have to check out the backside to screw it down. So on the backside you should find 4 to 5 holes for the screws. There should also be the power switch and the power connector. So here you have to connect it to the wall socket. And we will now switch the power switch here to off, and after we have installed everything, we will switch it back to on. So now just take your 4 or 5 screws and screw down the power supply. After you have done that, the case is almost ready to go, just a few things are missing, which we'll do later. But let's check out the mainboard. Here in the middle you can see the socket, and the socket holds your CPU. There's a lever which opens and closes the socket. Left and right from the socket here, we got the RAM slots. So the X99 supports 8 RAM slots. Now you may notice that those RAM slots got different colors, so we got gray and black ones. And that is for quad channel and dual channel. So basically, if you have 4 equal RAM modules and you connect them all in the same slot, so in the gray slot, then they will be faster than if you connect 2 in the black and 2 in the gray one. I will explain that later a little bit more. Okay, then let's check out here the ATX power connector. That's basically the main power connector which powers the whole mainboard. But there's also a second power connector, which is the CPU power connector, so don't forget it. Then here you can see one of the 4 PCI Express ports, which are for the graphics processing unit. So those big ports have 16 lanes, but there are also some smaller PCI Express ports which just have 1 lane, and they're just for some other cards like sound cards. On the back side you can see a lot of connectors, so those are the USB connectors, audio connectors, Ethernet connectors, and all the rest. Now here we have SATA ports, and this board here has a lot of different SATA ports, and I will explain it a little bit later. Now here we can see the front panel connector for the reset switch, power switch, and all the LEDs. And it's really important to connect it properly. But also important are the front USB, front audio, and the fan connectors. I will later show you how to hook it up, but you can also find that in the user manual of the mainboard. And new big ATX boards usually come with 9 mounting holes, and you should find the screws to mount that in the package which comes with the case. Okay guys, so now we're going to install the CPU, and first of all we have to remove the protection cover from the socket. That protection cover prevents dirt entry and also protects the pins of the socket, which you can see right over here. Now to open up the socket, that depends on the socket you're using. Here on this socket you have to push in the first lever and then just release the pressure. You see it opens up automatically. Now just do that to the second lever. And you have to do that in the correct order, so this is marked with 1 and 2. And now you can also flip up that cover here. It's just a metal cover which pushes down the CPU to the pins on the socket. And what we're going to do now is insert the CPU. So here you can see it, it's the 5820K. And when you touch the CPU, only touch it on the side. Do not touch the pins or the contacts on the backside, because if they get dirty, there may be bad contacts and you can also kill your CPU if you have pins on the backside and you just break some off or bend one or whatever. So be really careful, and also have a look at this golden triangle, because this indicates on how to insert the CPU. So you have seen the triangle on the CPU, and you can also see here one triangle on the socket. Now what you do is just flip up here this metal plate, and now you insert the CPU that both triangles match. There are also 2 plastic pins which should fit in the notch of the CPU. You can see them on the left side. You don't have to apply pressure, so just lay it down on the pins and then push down the metal cover. If you have to apply pressure, you did something wrong. So until now there should be no pressure. But now you have to close the socket with those levers, and you have to do it in the correct order, and now you have to apply pressure. So don't be shy, push it down until it snaps in. So as you can see, I have to apply a bit pressure, not too much but a bit. So it's completely normal if you have to push it down. But just make sure, double check that the CPU is correct in the socket. Okay, great, the CPU is in the socket, and now we should think about the cooling solution. So that really depends on the cooler you have bought. On some sockets and on some coolers you have to have such a back plate. Basically that's just a back plate which you put here on the backside on the mainboard, and then you take some screws on the other side and you screw it down, and on that you will fix the cooler. But here on the 2011 you don't need it, because here this metal frame, the metal socket here, has 4 threads, and into that I will just screw my screws for the H105 water cooling from Corsair. And it's pretty easy, and it really depends on the cooler you're using, so I would definitely check out the user manual which comes with the cooler. And if you're using the stock cooler, it's even easier. So there are a lot of tutorials online on how to fix the stock cooler on the mainboard. Okay, so actually now you should test if the cooler you're going to use fits and isn't covering anything. But my cooler is really small, so there won't be a problem. Now we just have to think where to insert our RAM modules. And you can find the best configuration in the user manual of the mainboard. And yeah, we have Quadchannel. That means we have to put all our RAM modules in slots with the same color. And the user manual states that you should first fill up the gray ones and then the black ones. So usually you just fill up first the slots which are more away from the CPU, like here the gray ones. Okay, then let's have a look at this RAM module. So don't touch the contacts and you will see here a notch which is not exactly in the middle. So it's placed more on one side of the RAM. And the same goes here for the slots. So you can only put them in one direction. What you do now is you open the slot and then you slide in the RAM. Make sure the notch fits exactly. And then you take your two thumbs and then you just press it down until it snaps in. You may have heard of zero force insertion, and yeah, actually that's correct. But you have to apply a bit of force when you close the socket of the CPU and when you install the RAM. So you just have to check that the triangle of the CPU matches and also that the notch here matches, and then apply a little bit of force until the connector closes. So that's pretty easy, it snaps in, and actually you can't do anything wrong with that. Okay, so when the RAM is installed, we can prepare our case to fit the mainboard. And now the RAM is in, so let's just double check all the connectors, and then let's go to the case and let's prepare it for the mainboard. When you take a look at the bottom plate of your case, you will see that there's some holes with threads, and they are for those spacers or standoffs. And those standoffs are really important. If you screw down your mainboard without those standoffs, you will just short your contacts on the mainboard. And you know, metal is conductive and the bottom plate here is made out of metal. That means you need some space between that. And you can get that with those standoffs. So that means we need as much of those standoffs like we have mounting holes on our mainboard. And we have 9 mounting holes on the mainboard. That means we need 9 of those standoffs. Unfortunately, I just have here 6 in the case. So I have to replace 3 of those standoffs, and they should come with your case. So they come in a little package with the case and not with the mainboard. So check that out and make sure you have as much standoffs in the case and also in the correct spot like you have mounting holes on the mainboard. And that's what I will do right now. Now when you have done that, you should do something which most people forget, and it can be really annoying if you forget that. And that's the I/O plate on the back side. That's basically just a little plate which covers all the connectors of your mainboard, and that prevents dirt entry and also a little bit better airflow. Here on this mainboard it's also with LED backlight, so that's pretty cool. And you just have to apply that from the inside of the case. So you just push that from the inside to the outside until it snaps in. And it's different for every mainboard, so you will get that with your mainboard. You maybe also will get one with your case, but that one doesn't fit. So make sure you take the one from your mainboard. And when it's in, you can actually put in your mainboard. Okay, now before we install the mainboard, let me tell you something about airflow. Because without the mainboard it's easier to install additional fans. And the cool air should come in here at the front or at the bottom, then go through our system, so flow up here, cool our CPU, GPU, and go out at the backside or at the top. And now it's important to get an airflow which just goes in one direction, so we do not get turbulences in the case, because that would mean we have bad cooling. Now, to get in good airflow, you need to know in which direction your fans are blowing or sucking, and that's really important. So let me show you here one of my fans, and you will see it blows in one direction and it sucks the air through in one direction. So on 90% of the fans the airflow is labeled with a little arrow, but if you can't find an arrow on the fan, it should usually be somewhere right over here. You have to have a look at the fan, but also 90% of the fans are just blowing the air out on this side where the motor is sitting and where you have the frame. So when you can see that logo and hear the frame which holds the motor, then you know the air is coming out here and it's sucking the air through on the other side. So you have to make sure you just put it into the correct way in your case. So I want the hot air going out on the backside, so I have to place it like this in my case. Usually the fan is mounted with 4 screws in the case, and the screws either come with the fan or with the case, so you have to check that out. Then just screw all the 4 screws in and you're ready to go. Okay guys, so now it's time to install my dual radiator water cooling system. And it's pretty big, If you want to, there are also single radiator water cooling systems if you want to use water cooling, and because it's so big I have to mount it here at the top of the case. And it takes 220mm slots, so that's pretty big, and it doesn't fit in all cases. If you have a single radiator water cooling system, you can place it near to the CPU. And those radiators get mounted just like 120mm fans, so they have the same mounting holes. You can see the threads here at the backside. You just have to use different screws, which you will get with the water cooling system. And the fans are pushing the air from the inside to the outside. You can also use it the other way. That really depends on how you like to use it, and it will affect the cooling performance just a little bit. Okay, so I will just screw down my radiator and then we'll have a look at the mainboard. So now the case is prepared and we can put in the mainboard. Just make sure that the mounting holes are matching the standoffs, then push it a little bit against the I/O plate and screw it down. Make sure that you are using all the 9 mounting holes and screw it down properly. Do not over tighten the screws, just be careful and make sure it fits perfectly. Now when the mainboard is in, it's time to apply the water cooling block. Because I cannot take the water cooling system apart, I have to do it now when the mainboard is in. And before we can put it on the CPU, we have to check out both surfaces and see if there's already thermal compound on it. Usually when you buy it, there's already thermal compound on this Corsair water cooling, but I have wiped it off just to show you on how to apply thermal compound. And this thermal paste is actually just compensating the microscopical small irregularities of both surfaces, so you get the best heat conduction. And you can use whatever thermal compound you want to use, so I'm just using here a cheap mixture which I got from a friend, and it does the job pretty well. Now there are different ways on how to apply it. Some people cover the whole surface, some people make an X, some people even make smileys on the CPU, but the best way is just to place a small amount here in the middle of the CPU. You really don't need much of that thermal paste. The unevenness between those two surfaces is so small, you really just need a very small amount of thermal paste here in the middle of the CPU. So let me just place it right over here. And yeah, that's enough, actually that's more than enough. And now I will apply the water cooling block. Now just make sure that you put it even on the CPU, and also if you put it on the CPU, don't take it off again, otherwise you should wipe the thermal paste again and reapply it, because you will spread it all over the CPU, or I don't know, you will just spread it on the mainboard. So make sure you put it on correctly and then just screw it down. And it's also important how you screw it down. So don't screw it down all the way on one side. So start at one side just a little bit, then on the opposite side, so on the opposite corner, just like you would tighten the bolts of the wheel of a car. That makes sure that the heatsink is very even on the CPU and there's not too much pressure on one side of the CPU. Okay, shit, so that shouldn't happen. So first of all, just tighten them with your hand, and when you're done with that, so from each corner to the other corner, you can use a screwdriver to tighten them until the end. The water cooling block should now be fixed, and now it's also time to connect it to the mainboard. If you have an air cooling system, you usually just have one 4-pin connector, but here we have one 3-pin connector and a 4-pin connector. To give the water cooling pump enough power, because it's integrated in this water cooling block and it runs always at full RPM. And the 4-pin connector gives it some additional power and is also to monitor the rotations per minute of the water cooling pump, which should nearly be at 100% on the small water cooling systems. If you get some newer mainboard, you may notice it gets a CPU fan and a CPU opt connector. CPU opt is the optional CPU fan connector, and I would recommend to put the 4-pin connector on the CPU fan connector and the 3-pin connector, which is just the fan connector, to the CPU opt connector. Because if the water cooling pump breaks down, you will get a CPU fan error, but actually it doesn't matter how you connect it, you can also connect it this way. Then now let's have a look on how to install CD drives. So usually you can take off or flip off the front of each case. That depends on the case you're using. Here in this case you can flip up the side parts. And now you can just slide in your CD drives. First of all, you have to remove the covers, so just start at the top, then slide in your CD drive. They have all the same size, it doesn't matter if it's a CD drive, DVD drive or Blu-ray drive. So just slide it in until it locks in, And then you have to fix it with some screws from the side, so make sure you have removed both case windows. When the CD drive is slided in correctly, you should see the holes with the threads right over here and here, so usually you have 2 of them. And now you just need to take 2 screws and fix it from each side. So usually the screws come with your case, so you should find them in the package which comes with your case. And now just do that on both sides, and then we'll have a look at the hard drives. But maybe you also got some quick locks like I do, so those are pretty easy. You just have to slide in the CD drive, then push once and then they are locked, and then push once to release them if you want to take them out. So those things are really cool, but they're just included with some more expensive cases. That were the CD drives, and now let's have a look at the hard drives. And usually you have to slide them in from the inside, so not from the outside. And now it depends on the case you're using. So sometimes you have quick locks, you just slide them in. Sometimes, like on my case, you have a cage and you have to mount the hard drives here in this cage, and then you mount the cage in the case. So you have to check that out, that depends on your case. And you see the SSD is much smaller, so it's just 2.5 inch, and you get such an adapter plate for that. And then you just mount it like a CD drive in this cage here. And when you're done with that, you mount the cage in your case. So that's just pretty easy, so I will just slide it in and then fix it with 1 or 2 screws from each side to make sure it's fixed in the case. Then also make sure that the SATA ports of the hard drive and of the SSD are pointing towards the mainboard, and that the sticker of both drives is pointing upwards, otherwise we will have problems with connecting them to the mainboard and to the power supply. Okay, great, now it's time to hook up the drives, and we have 2 connectors on each drive. So both are SATA drives, that means we have 2 slimline connectors. So we have one SATA connector, which is the smaller one, that will be connected to the mainboard, and we have one SATA power connector, which is connected to the power supply. So the SATA cables should come with your mainboard or with your hard drive, and the power supply cable comes directly out of your power supply. So now I'll show you how they look like. So that's the slimline connector, the power connector for the SATA drives, and this connector here will only fit in one direction. So you see it is L-shaped, and so is the port on the hard drive. So you can only put it in one direction. Just apply a little bit of force until you feel it snapping in, and make sure it's all the way in. Then now let's have a look at the SATA connector. And yeah, it's the smaller one, but it got the same shape. And once again, you can see that L shape on this connector, so it will only fit in one direction. And also most of those SATA cables have a lock mechanism. So when you want to pull them out, you have to push in that metal part here at the top. Please, if you remove them, always push that metal part and don't pull like crazy, because otherwise you will maybe damage your SATA port. And you will also feel it snapping in, so as you can see, it's now locked and it won't come out. And now you do the same for all your hard drives. After that, it's time to connect our hard drives, disk drives and front panel eSATA ports to the mainboard. You will may see a lot of different SATA connectors on your mainboard, and now you have to think, to which should I connect which cable? And let me quickly tell you the differences between the ports. The big port here in the middle is the SATA Express port, which you get on newer boards, and the other black ones are just SATA 6 ports. Now, SATA Express is just for SATA Express SSDs. If you have none, then just don't think about that. Then just connect your SSD drives to SATA 6 ports, which are the smaller ones, the black ones right over here. If you also have SATA 3 ports, then don't use them, just if you don't have enough SATA 6 ports, because SATA 6 ports are much faster. They are capable of outputting 6.0 gigabits per second, which is double the speed from SATA 3. And the new SATA Express ports are capable of outputting 10 gigabits per second. But they are also downgradable. That means you can also connect normal SATA drives to that, but they will just run with 6 gigabits per second. As you can see, they also fit into that connector and they also will work. Okay, so basically that's it. And now let's have a look at the front panel connectors. Now it's time to connect the front panel connectors, and here I have some USB connectors, some Firewire connector, so that depends on the case you're using. And 3094 is the Firewire connector. I'm not sure if there's a Firewire port on the mainboard, but let's see if we can find one. And they only fit in one direction, so one pin on the connector and on the port is missing. So don't apply much force, double check if it fits. And usually those connectors are labeled on the mainboard, so we can see here USB and also USB 3.0. So my case is a little bit older, it hasn't got an USB 3.0 port, but anyway I will just use the old USB 2.0 ports. If you got USB 3.0, just connect it to this port. And also left from the USB port, you will see a red connector, which is a 3-pin connector for a system fan. And you will have several of those connectors here on your mainboard, so make sure you also connect all your system fans. And once again, I want to show you here the connector. So you see one pin is missing, it will only fit in one direction. So make sure you just plug in USB to USB ports and audio or firewire to the correct ports, because otherwise you will kill the ports on your mainboard. Okay, then here we got the front audio port. Now on all the cases you may got HD audio and AC97. So you cannot mix them up. You have to check the user manual if you got HD audio or AC97. And all newer mainboards have HD audio, so don't try to plug in AC97 into HD audio. It will not fit, it will not work, and you will maybe damage your mainboard. Okay, so basically that's it, and now let's have a look at the reset power switch and also at the LEDs. Here you can see the front panel connector on the mainboard, and now it really depends on the case you're using how many things you have to connect. My case is very simple, it just got a power switch and an HDD LED, and those things are really simple, so those are just 2-pin connectors, and when you press the switch it just closes the circuit and then your PC starts. And now you have to make sure you connect them correctly. So you have to connect them to plus and minus. On the switch it doesn't matter, but if you got an LED, it may not lighten up if you switch plus and minus. So please check the user manual on how to connect it. Here it's pretty easy, you will see plus and minus on the connector, and the red one here is the power switch. So now I'll connect it to the panel here. Just double check plus and minus. Usually minus is black, so that's ground, and plus has a color like red. And sometimes also ground is white. That really depends. Just check out the user manual. And it also depends on how many cables you have to connect. So if you have a reset switch, which I don't have, you have to connect another cable, power LED, HDD LED. My case just has a power switch and an HDD LED, which is that one here. So now just connect them like shown in the user manual of your mainboard and also in the user manual of your case, and then you're ready to go. One of the last big parts we have to put in our rig is the GPU. So I have here 4 big PCI Express ports for 4-way SLI or Crossfire, but I'm not using that, way too expensive. So I will just put my graphics processing unit here in the first PCI Express port, in the big one. So usually the first PCI Express port gives you the maximum bandwidth if you just have one GPU. And here it is, the GTX970. So here at the bottom we can see the PCI Express connector. And there's a little notch, so you cannot put it wrong in the slot. Just make sure that the notch fits in the slot. Also before you insert, remove the PCI Express expansion bay protection cover from your case. It's usually a little metal part. And when you insert it, just double check the notch and make sure that the metal part from the graphics card goes between the mainboard and the case. And now you can fix the GPU by screwing down the metal part to the case. And usually you just take the screw, which you have unscrewed by removing the protection cover. And if you can't find one, then check out the package which comes with a case. And when you have screwed that down, then the GPU should be fixed in the slot. And now it's time to connect it to the power supply. Now we have to connect the additional power connectors to the GPU. You may know the PCI Express port can't provide all the power the GPU needs, so each of those 6-pin connectors can provide additional 75 watts for the GPU. Now it depends on how you can connect it. If you got 6-pin connectors which come directly out of your power supply, you're good to go, just connect them. If you don't have them, you have to use an adapter. Usually those adapters come with your CPU and they look like this. So you got one 6-pin connector for the GPU and 2 4-pin 12V Molex connectors to power the 6-pin connector. So if you want to have 2 6-pin connectors, you will need 4 12V Molex connectors. And yeah, that's a bit much, so you have to check if your power supply supports that. And also those 6-pin connectors just fit in one direction. You just have to look at it and you will see they only will go in one direction. So just check the pins and then connect them. Oh yeah, we are almost ready to go, and now it's time to power the mainboard. To power the mainboard you have to use this 24-pin ATX connector. And now it depends on which power supply you're using. If you're using a newer power supply, you will already have one 24-pin connector. And some older power supplies have a splitted connector like this one here, which is 20 pins plus 4 pins. And yeah, my connector looks a little bit different because I've hooked up the front panel to it, so you can see that connection looks a little bit strange. But anyway, your connector will look pretty similar. So you will have a 24-pin connector, which you have to connect to your mainboard. And also once again, this just fits in one direction. So you can't even push it in the other direction. It's really simple. And if you have a 20-pin connector, don't forget to plug in the 4-pin connector too. And make sure it also fits perfectly. Now most people forget to connect the CPU power connector, and as the name suggests, it's located near the CPU. And on newer boards it's an 8-pin connector. That means a 4 plus 4-pin connector, so you get here 2 4-pin connectors. And on older mainboards you just got a 4-pin connector. So that depends on the mainboard you're using. So if you just find here a 4-pin connector, then only connect one of the connectors. Okay, so the 8-pin connector only fits in one direction, just like the ATX connector, and now we are ready to go. Just let's double check the cable management. Oh yeah, so you now finished your first build and it's ready to go. Just double check all the connections and make sure that no wires are hanging into the fans. So you can use cable straps or whatever to tie the cables together. Also, if you have good cable management, it's also better for the airflow. Then just double check all the connections, connect it to the wall socket. Don't forget the power switch on the power supply, and also make sure that the power switch on the front panel is connected properly, and then you can also hook up the monitor, everything you need, and start it for the first time. And that's what I'm doing right now, so let's see if the PC is working. Okay, so it's up and running, and the first thing you should do is check out the BIOS. So just turn it on, and then press delete or F2, so you should see that on your screen what you have to press to enter the BIOS. And in the BIOS, go to system status, and check out your temperatures. So leave the PC running for 15-20 minutes and just keep an eye on the temperatures. And yeah, the water cooling system, the Corsair H105, does a very great job. So the CPU temperature after 20 minutes was on 23 degrees. I know it's on idle, but still very great. If you think about, we have 20 degrees here in the room, and that's a very good value. After the system test, when you know everything is running fine, you're ready to go to install your operating system from your disk drive or USB drive, so there are a lot of tutorials online. Okay, so this was my tutorial on how to build your first PC. I hope you enjoyed it, and I think I had to do it because yeah, I was getting so much new hardware, and I just thought, let's do a tutorial. I hope I explained everything correctly, so feel free to leave comments down below, also if you have questions. And as always guys, thanks for watching, and I hope I see you again in my next videos. Bye bye!